Hello, welcome to Cubs PS Plus, a Northside Numbers game, a mostly weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and sometime youth baseball coach. Cubs PS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like The Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, and Baseball Rabbit Hole. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever it is you get your podcasts, and Cubs PS Plus is always available ad-free to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPSPlus, where you can support the show and find a variety of benefits for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at Cubs PS Plus, a spin on the baseball metric OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it? Please drop a review wherever it is you get your podcasts. And if you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you could share an episode with a friend. It's June 8th, 2024. The Cubs are 31-33. And they're hoping for a split in Cincinnati. It's been a while and it's a lot to dig into. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Welcome into episode 78. No Cub has ever worn number 78, so today we'll talk about what the Cubs are doing so far and what they're on pace for. They're on pace right now for 78 wins. Now, the projections are better than that, and there are a bunch of reasons we can get into as to why, but today they are on pace for 78 wins, and that's just not good enough. This is a team that I thought before the season, and still do, that this team could win 90 games, should win the division. This team should still win the division. I think the Brewers are still playing a little bit over their head, but they are going to be a good team. They're not going to fall apart. They're not going to come crashing down to earth. I think they're going to win probably 85, 86 games, which is where Fangraphs has the Brewers projected to be. Currently, the Fangraphs projections have the Cubs finishing 80 and 82, tied with the Cardinals, a game ahead of the Reds and a couple games ahead of the Pirates. So it was always going to be a close division. I don't think the Brewers are going to keep this distance ahead of everybody. But at some point, the Cubs just have to start playing ball. You know, yesterday's game lost to the Reds in the second game of the series. It was a 3-2 game. It was fine-ish. They're just not playing good baseball. I mean, Justin Steele pitched pretty well, but then there was a wild pitch on a strikeout, or maybe it was a pass ball. I can't remember how it was ruled, but it got away. Runner gets on, runner comes in to score, leads to a little bit more action in the inning instead of an inning-ending strikeout. Reds get two, they tack on one later. Cubs come up short. And just some fundamentally dumb things. I mean, this is not a good base running team. They're not playing well defensively. Like the whole makeup of this team was supposed to be good pitching, great defense. Hopefully they get enough hitting. I mean, last year they were 9th offensively in runs scored. You know, they were an above average offense last year. And for all the struggles and all the stuff we hated at the end of the season and the slow start, whatever, they got it done last year. And this team still might. We're right around the point last season where the Cubs were close to 10 games under 500, went on a tear. Right now they're 2 games under 500. They're still in second place. They're tied now with the Reds for second place. But they have to get out of their own way. I mean, last night was a good example. I forget which inning. It might have been the 6th. Michael Busch was on second base with 2 outs, and a chopper was hit to third base. And I can get maybe an over-aggressive play where you come, you know, it was a high hopper. Maybe you think you can beat it. But Michael Busch was just running to third base, and all of a sudden it was like he was surprised that the ball got there at the same time, and Candelaria just tagged him. He had nowhere to go. It's one thing if you come in hard, you know what you're doing, you're trying to create distraction, just trying to make something happen. I could see PCA doing that. Come in, you know, slide head first, make Candelario think about whether he's going to try to drop a tag down or whether he's just going to ignore you and go to first base. But it just kind of ran into nothing. And there's just been a lot of that. The Cubs, I think, lead the majors in getting thrown out at home plate. You know, I've talked about the contact play some. They run it all the time, and it so often doesn't work. I still think it's fundamentally a fine play, but situationally there are times when you would do it and times when you wouldn't, and the Cubs just seem to do it. And there's a lot of talk about trades. I mean, the Cubs, if they're going to compete, and we'll talk about trade ideas here in a minute, but you know, if they're going to compete, they're going to have to add, especially bullpen help, probably add another bat to this lineup. But ultimately, it's going to come down to what the core of this team does. So the Cubs have some guys putting up decent numbers. I mean, looking up and down the lineup, you know, The Cubs have Mike Tauchman. I think he's getting a little bit overexposed at this point, but he still has a 129 WRC plus. Michael Busch has a 123. Seiya Suzuki 122. Although Seiya's having trouble staying on the field. He started last season, missed a big chunk with an oblique injury. Came back, had his struggles, went on an absolute tear to finish the season. And then this year, got off to a decent start, then had the oblique injury. Now, yesterday, he was stealing second base. He took the catcher's throw to the ribs. And then later was wincing on a swing and wound up coming out of the game. I haven't heard any updates yet today on what's going on with him, but I don't know if this is going to mean more time on the shelf. Seiya Suzuki is a guy that needs to be in the middle of the lineup or top of the lineup, 2, 3, 4, wherever you decide to hit him and produce. Patrick Wisdom's doing okay at a 110 WRC plus. Cody Bellinger's at 110, but he's been struggling also. Where it really starts to hurt is, I'll point to Dansby Swanson. He's got an 82 WRC plus. He's hitting 209. He's got an OPS of 628. It's just not good enough. And if this team is going to compete, those guys, Ian Happ, Dansby Swanson, Cody Bellinger, Seiya Suzuki, like those guys, Nico Horner, are going to have to hit. You can go and you can add a piece. They could make a trade. I've heard talk about trading for Luis Robert, trading for Pete Alonso. There are guys that are going to be available. You could go get a high level bat, and that's going to have an impact. But they're not going to be able to trade to fill 4 spots. So those guys are just going to have to play and get it done. Now, Ian Happ has been a lot better lately. He seems to be coming into form. But again, is this going to be a hot month for Ian Happ and a step back, or is this going to be a step back into what he typically does? I think he seems healthy right now, so I don't see any particular reason why we should expect Ian Happ to be something less than what he typically is for his career. And that's not an elite baseball player. It's a good baseball player. He is paid to be an above average outfielder, above average offensive producer, and that's exactly what he's been. He's not paid to be Aaron Judge. He's not paid to be Mookie Betts. He's getting paid like an above average player, and typically that's what he produces. Right now he's at a 104 WRC plus, and that's after a slow start. Again, I find it really hard to look at batting average this year. I mean, it's pretty historically low for baseball standards. I mean, so Ian Happ's hitting 223, which is not good enough, but the league average batting average is 240 this year. So everything is down. His slug is a little bit down, and the whole is his OPS is right about 700. He's typically a 770 to 800 guy. He's been above that sometimes. I think he'll get there. So some of that is just he had a horrid month in most of May. He was awful. But at the end of May, he started coming on, and now he's been good for the early part of June. But so trades are going to be bullpen and a relief arm. On the flip side, let's say the Cubs don't come out of this little funk they're in, and they're languishing. They're 6 or 7 under 500 at the trade deadline, or approaching the trade deadline. This is a hard team to be a seller. You look up and down the roster, and it's a lot of young guys. It's guys under contract. Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki are both under contract for a couple more years after this. They both have no trade clauses. Doesn't mean you can't trade them. It just means they have to be involved and pick the destination, that type of thing. Cody Bellinger could be tradable, but one, he's not having a super season. I mean, he's okay. Slug hasn't really been what I would expect it to be. He's a 750, 754 OPS. Fine, but you're trading a guy who makes $30 million a year and who also has a player option next year for $30 million. So far, he's not playing at a level that's going to cause him to opt out of that contract, most likely. So I don't know how tradable he is. There might be a certain team or two here or there that maybe makes sense to make a deal for, but this isn't like last year when they had, potentially looking at Cody Bellinger, Marcus Stroman, a bunch of other guys that were on the last years of their deal. Look at the bullpen. I mean, Hector Neris, maybe he's got a player option for next year also. Catchers are untradeable. I don't know if the Cubs would trade Michael Busch. Like, what do you? I mean, I could see trading him if you're upgrading for a big bat potentially, but there just aren't a lot of trade pieces on here that make a lot of sense. I mean, starting pitching, Kyle Hendricks is in what's likely the last year of his deal. He's not tradable right now. You're not going to trade any of the young pitchers. You're not going to trade Justin Steele. I mean, you might be able to work out a trade for Tyone, but there just aren't a lot of sellable pieces right now. So the team's just going to have to figure it out. But I still think this is a better baseball team than they've been playing. I mean, the disappointing part at this point is they've wasted a lot of really good starting pitching. I mean, Shota Imanaga has been incredible up to his last couple outings, but I think he's going to work through that. Justin Steele has had some struggles, but I thought on the whole he pitched really well last night. So that's all going well. They get Jordan Wicks back. It's interesting they're putting Jordan Wicks in the bullpen. I might have flipped it to put Ben Brown back in the bullpen because I think Brown plays a little bit better there. But I also see Craig Counsell's perspective where he says, they don't have a starting pitching need right now. And they don't. I mean, everybody's been pitching fine. Tyone struggled his last time out, but on the whole this season, he's been good. I still see a lot of hate for him online. But you look up and down, things are good. I mean, Shota Imanaga, his ERA is 1.88. His expected ERA is 3.02. So he's been, I'm going to talk about luck some in this episode later, particularly as it goes to Christopher Morel. But, there's a little bit of a luck factor. Like the numbers aren't always exactly kind of where they should be, but even at 3.02, Shota Imanaga is a very good starting pitcher. He leads the team in Fangraphs WAR. Ben Brown's been very good. He's pitching a little bit better as well. But you also get into then fielding independent pitching, FIP. So that kind of plays into the defense and, how a guy, kind of what a guy should have in terms of an ERA. And so if you strip the defense out of it, last year, I think the defense really helped the pitching. The Cubs pitchers were better because of the defense behind them. And I really thought that'd be the case this year. I knew we had a wild card at third base with Christopher Morel and Michael Busch. I don't know what I had expected for him at first base. He's kind of new to the position. I think he does some things well. I think he's on the whole, he's not a great defender. But this defense has been really disappointing. The catcher defense has been bad. Nico Horner and Dansby Swanson, based on the expectations we have for them as Gold Glovers, as potentially the best defensive players at their position in baseball, really disappointing. Ian Happ's been up and down. Seiya Suzuki's been kind of a mess. Even Cody Bellinger has not been as good as I would have expected him to be. Now we're getting to see more PCA out there. That's going to help. You have to think that Dansby Swanson and Nico are going to play to their typical career abilities eventually. So I would hope that defense is going to improve, but so far it's not. And when you look around this team, you have to look at, who the Cubs are and who they should be the rest of this season. So where can you get a lift? Where can you expect regression? And I talk about regression and progression to the mean a lot. I mean, if a guy has a proven track record and is off to a particularly hot start or a particularly cold start, some guys are just like that. I grew up watching Ryan Sandberg basically be terrible every April. And then at the end of the season, his numbers were always there and he's in the Hall of Fame. So some guys are notorious slow starters. Some guys are notorious hot starters, but in any case, there is variability and guys do typically play to their capabilities. So where can the Cubs expect to see some gains? I mean, Dansby has to be one. If Dansby is going to have a season like this where he's, for his standard, substandard defensively and hitting at like an 82 WRC plus rate, that's just not going to be good enough. And that's going to be something that really holds this team back. And we can talk about the money, and I don't necessarily think a guy should start just because of his contract. But this is a guy you brought in to anchor the shortstop position for 7 years. And we're in year 2. And guys have bad seasons. So this might just be a season where Dansby Swanson has a bad year. And it could be a number of things playing into it. For a while he was playing hurt. He was playing with that knee injury instead of going on the injured list. And then he did go down. He might not be healthy right now. He might still be kind of playing on a bum knee. That's the kind of thing that we don't always know about that can impact performance. But if that's the case, he might have to go on the shelf again. I mean, at some point, I don't know that he's exactly going to lose his job, but the Cubs do have a little bit of infield depth. I mean, they've David Bodie up now, but they've got Luis Vasquez down at Iowa, who could get a shot at some point. Nico could slide over to the shortstop for a while, and you got guys who can fill in. Although now I have questions about Nico too, because Nico just had got hit in the hand by a pitch on Thursday and stayed in the game. I don't know. I'm always worried when a guy gets hit in the hand because those bones are delicate and all that sort of thing. And then he didn't play yesterday. I haven't seen the lineup yet for today. So we'll see. Hopefully he doesn't have to go on the shelf. Between him and Seiya, I hope they're both okay. Maybe miss a game or two and get back into it. What I also hope the Cubs don't do is what they do way too often, which is, let a guy sit for a couple days. It's fine to sit for a couple days. You can make an injured list move retroactive to 3 days prior. And so you can miss a couple games, decide it's worse, go ahead and backdate the IL stint and go. But like last time, Nico Hoerner wound up missing like 9 days. And so I guess technically they won by not putting him on the injured list, but it meant they played a man down for nine days. And you certainly can't do that with two players right now. You only have 4 on the bench to start with, and one of those is a catcher. So, at this point in the season, I think the Cubs have to look at, I think they have very good starting pitching. I think that's going to hold up. But on the whole, it's probably going to take a little bit of a step back because, Shota and Brown and Wicks before, and Wisniewski at times, like, I think you're going to get a little step up from Steele. You no longer have Hendricks in the rotation, so that's a plus. Assad is probably going to not step too much further back, but again, he started with a sub-2 ERA, and that's not who he is. He's probably going to be a low 3 ERA guy. That's fine. Shota Imanaga is probably going to wind up around 3. I would guess. So they're going to give you good starting pitching, but probably not as good as what it's been. And the Cubs have wasted it. The Cubs have wasted a lot of really good starts. I think the bullpen almost has to improve. I mean, hopefully you're going to add pieces. Hopefully at some point they get some of these injured guys back. I have not heard an update on Julian Merriweather, but I'm hoping they could get him back in July potentially. Would love to see Caleb Killian come back. He was looking really, really good in spring training, pumping 99. Make a move or two, and Porter Hodge, Luke Little, hopefully those guys eventually start to figure it out. But the biggest thing for me is offense. I mean, the Cubs are losing a lot of games, like yesterday, 3-2. They've won a couple 1-0 games. They've lost 2-1. Oftentimes, they're playing close games again. The last 2 seasons, it seems like every single game is within a run or two. And it's when you're playing in those margins, you have to be so good and so consistently good. You also bring all of baseball's luck factors into play. All of a sudden, some batted ball luck does matter. All of a sudden, a bloop hit makes a big difference because you're in a tie ball game. And those things can be lucky, but the Cubs need to build an offense that's going to put consistent runs on the board. And last year they were very boom and bust. They wound up, like I said, 9th overall. This year they are, I think, 22nd. Let me bring this back up. No, sorry, that's a different stat. They're 15th in runs scored. So they're league average in runs scored, but they've had some big wins and some big losses. But for the most part, they're just playing consistently every day in the margins. I mean, you look back over the Cubs' last 10 games, and it's 3-2, 8-4, 7-6, 7-6, 5-2, 7-5, 5-4, 6-4. 6-10. A lot of these games are close. A lot of times they're blown open by one inning. That's also been an issue. And that's an area where I've talked about with the bullpen. They have to get in there and be effective from the start. Too many times the pen will come in, walk a guy, give up a hit, whatever, first pitch, first batter, first couple batters, then they'll settle in and be fine. Jose Cuas has done a lot of that. Luke Little's done a bunch of that. That's got to improve. When the season started, the Cubs were off to a good start. I mean, they were working counts. They were getting starting pitch counts up early, getting to those bullpens. The Cubs did that to the Dodgers, and they won 2 out of 3 in Wrigley. And now they're just struggling, and they're playing other teams that get hot, and just not quite enough. I mean, they did sweep the White Sox, which is good because the White Sox are historically terrible. But even those games, the Cubs had to come back from 5-0, 5-1, both games to win 7-6. And they did it, so credit to that. But it's just got to be better. And with the schedule coming up, I mean, the Cubs have a very manageable schedule ahead of them right now. They've got 2 more with the Reds and Cincinnati. The Reds are hot right now, but the Cubs need to take care of some business and hopefully they can get the split in this series. They play Tampa, who's been struggling. They play the Cardinals, who are under 500. Giants, Mets, Giants. And then they end the month with a series against the Brewers. And again, baseball scheduling is so weird. I mean, they played all their games against Atlanta within the span of 10 days. They're already done with the Padres. They're going to be done with the 7 games against the Giants in 10 days. I get kind of sick of that schedule, but I don't have any say over it, so it is what it is. And the Cubs are going to want to make some noise in June because then you get to July and you got another tough stretch of the schedule. They open July with a homestand against the Phillies. They go to Baltimore. They get the Diamondbacks again, Brewers. Royals are actually playing some pretty good baseball. So the Cubs are just going to have to take care of business. But this is a month where they should be able to, if they are a team that's as good as I think they are, or I think they can be, this is a month where they need to make some moves. And one of the guys I think that can really help them do that is Christopher Morel. And so I want to talk about him a little bit today. So this is where, it's one thing where you can look at the numbers. And, he's hitting cleanup and he's batting .201. He does lead the team with 11 homers. He's got an OPS just a tick under 700 at 698. And it's easy to look and say, well, that's not really the Christopher Morel that I was expecting to see. But when you really dig into the numbers, there's definitely some luck factor there. So let's back up and let's talk about Christopher Morel last year. Last year he hit 26 home runs, hit .247, had an OPS of 821. And when you look at his StatCast data, so if you go to baseballsavant.mlb.com, you can look at a lot of his StatCast data and things like hard hit rates. And overall, he was definitely an above average offensive player. Good base runner, fast. And what really pops off the page is, he was 91st percentile on average exit velocity at 92.1. He was 95th percentile on barrel rate at 15.9%. He was 92nd percentile in hard hit percentage at 50%. So it means he's hitting 50% of the contact he makes is 95 miles an hour or higher exit velo. Sweet spot percentage, launch angle sweet spot percentage was pretty low. And so he had a tendency to especially get under a lot of balls. And then on the negative side, what else pops out is he's second percentile and whiff rate at 37%. He struck out 37% of the time last year. I mean, that's definitely, he's a young player. That was his rookie year. I totally get it. Actually, it was not his rookie year. His rookie year was the year before. But still, he was 23 years old last year in the major leagues, and that was something he had to address. Sorry, I had that wrong. 37% was his whiff rate. So when he would swing 37% of the time, he would miss. His K rate was actually 31%, which was 10th percentile in baseball. And his walk rate was about average. He did not rate especially well fielding. Didn't really have a position. He was -7 ounce above average. 99th percentile in arm strength, though. And sprint speed is 82nd percentile. So let's fast forward that to this year. So the results haven't been there. The results are worse than last year so far. He's probably on pace for more home runs. His 26 probably would, over a full season, would have been right around 30. He's down in Iowa for the first month. And this year he's on pace for, probably on pace for about 25, 26 home runs if I actually do the math. No, he's actually probably on pace for closer to 30. But the 201 batting average, 698 OPS, is certainly not where he was last year. He's a 104 WRC plus this year, so he's just a tick above an average baseball hitter. He's kind of in that average-ish range. But when you look at his overall StatCast data, I mean, he is kind of off the charts. Bat speed is a new measure, but his bat speed is 97th percentile in baseball. Bat speed is interesting. I might dive into that in a future episode. Like, you look up and down baseball, and there are really good hitters with low bat speeds and really good hitters with high bat speeds and vice versa. So bat speed doesn't really play into it, but it passes the eyeball test. I mean, Christopher Morel swings hard. And when you get into some of the things that we talk about, like hard hit rates and barrel percentages, I mean, his barrel percentage is a little bit down this year. Last year he was almost 16%. This year he's about 12.5%. His hard hit rate is down from 50% to 45.9%. But one of the big changes he's made is with his whiff rate and K rate. So last year he whiffed 37% of the time. This year he whiffs right about 30% of the time, 29.9%. And his K rate is really impressive. Like, last year he struck out 31% of the time, was 10th percentile in baseball. This year he's 45th percentile in baseball, which is still a little below average, but his K rate's down to 21.8%. So he's cut that down 10%, which is just a massive leap. And this is not, you can look at that early in the season, first couple of weeks, and be like, that's interesting. But I mean, we got 2 months of data now. I mean, this is who he is this season. And his walk rate is now 86th percentile. And some of that, I think, is not having protection behind him, but he's doing a much better job of laying off-speed pitches out of the strike zone. His walk rate's up 50% basically from last year, from 8.4% to 12.1%. So I think he's clearly sacrificed a little bit of hard contact in order to make more contact. And that's showing up. So last year his expected WOBA, weighted on base average, was 343. This year it's 378. Now that's not where his on base average is. And this is where I want to talk a little bit about luck. On the one hand, I will say that Christopher Morel is unlucky, but basically what I like to do when I try to evaluate whether a player is having a good year or a bad year, I mean, objectively, is he having a good year? You can just look at the stats for that, right? He's hitting 201, OPS under 700. He's not having a great season. But then you get into why. And that's where I like to dig into some of the expected statistics. I mean, based on his hard contact, his expected batting average this year so far is 265. And that's just a huge, huge difference. Now, nobody is ever going to be like right on their expected averages. There are a million things that play into that. Sometimes a hard hit ball is an out because it's hit where you always hit things, and that's where the defense plays. So they're going to play you there, which is going to cut down those hits. That's why they banned the shift, right? All these lefty hitters were hitting line drives into the outfield. So you drop an infielder, halfway back between them and the right fielder, and you put a player into that zone where things get hit. And so some of that is a factor with Morel. So if you look at his hit spray chart, there's a concentration of those about where the third baseman plays. Typically, you'll see the third baseman play a little off the line with Morel, with the shortstop also cheating up the middle a little bit. And there are clusters. There are clusters where that third baseman plays, and there are clusters up the middle. There are also, a lot of balls pulled to left field. He's a very pull-heavy hitter. So he is going to lose some of that. That's, I wouldn't say luck. He's going to lose some of that to defensive positioning. Now, you'll see when he is really going well, like the other day he hit a home run in the first game in Cincinnati, absolute dead center. And when he is working, he's not a guy who goes opposite field a lot. I would like to see him do it more, but he's a guy that if he's working up the middle, that's a better approach for him, and that's when he tends to really go on a tear. Because that also then, still not every ball pulled right at the third baseman is going to be exactly where the guy's standing. And when you have hard contact, when you're hitting balls 100 miles an hour, there's a reason why coaches tell players to go out and hit the ball hard, because if you hit the ball hard, it's going to get on the defender faster. They have less time to move. If it's not directly at them, they have less time to take a couple steps to cover, so there's less range to cover. So you're more likely to get a hit. I mean, that's the basics of it. And so Christopher Morel right now is, his expected stats, his StatCast metrics are that of a high-end offensive player. Not quite, certainly not Aaron Judge, Juan Soto level. But, his expected slug is 502 so far this season. His expected batting average is 265. His expected on-base average is 378. If he had the 502 and the 378, that's almost a 900 OPS hitter. That's really, really strong. I do think while Christopher Morel does lose a good chunk to defensive positioning, I also think as long as he continues to keep that K rate down, continues to take his walks, continues to lay off some of those tough breaking pitches, I don't see a 200 batting average and an OPS under 700 as sustainable with these underlying hit metrics. I don't think it's that much defensive positioning. Now, how high is it going to go? We'll see. But especially as the weather warms up, balls are going to carry more than they did early in the season. I would also love to see the Cubs, and maybe Happ is that guy right now. He's hitting better, but get Morel more protection behind him in the order. I think part of the reason why his walk rate is up is they've been able to kind of pick around the edges of the zone, hope he chases, and then go deal with a worse hitter after him. Michael Busch, Ian Happ, Dansby Swanson, those guys are going to have to hit to help make that happen. But I think there's a lot to like with Morel. I think those expected stats are a big deal. I think the change he's made in his K rate is a big deal. And I don't see any reason at this point why it can't continue. And the other question is defensively. He's not been good defensively. He hasn't been quite worst case scenario, but he's been kind of close to it. His arm strength is still there. Obviously, he can make every throw. I still like him over there at third base better than Nick Madrigal. One, because Madrigal is an offensive zero. And also, two, Morel can play wherever you need him to play at third base. He can play back. He can play the line. He can go in the hole. He can go down the line. Can throw from anywhere. Problem is he's a little erratic. He will miss some plays that he should make. There have been stretches this year where I think he was showing clear signs of improvement, and then he'll back up for a couple games. But he's first percentile in outs above average at -9. So that's something the Cubs are going to have to think about. Now, they don't have an obvious replacement at third base. I don't think at this point you can have a serious lineup with Nick Madrigal, Miles Mastrobuoni, those guys in. Matt Shaw got off to a terrible start in the minors, but now he's been raking a lot lately. So maybe he's a guy that maybe he does get a shot towards the end of the season. The Cubs had Luis Vasquez up for a period of time. Maybe they've started to play him a little bit at third base in the minors. Maybe that's the direction you can go. At least get kind of a rotation in there. But I think at this point, the Cubs are probably just going to be looking at a chunk of Patrick Wisdom and Morel at third base and just going to have to live with it. But that position alone isn't pulling the whole team's defense down. Like, Dansby's got to be better. Nico's got to be better. Bellinger's got to be better. We've got to figure out how to get better at first base, and whether that's Michael Busch improving or whether that's Cody Bellinger coming over. Defense and right field's got to get better. It is what it is. But this team is, on the whole, it was a very disappointing May. Really disappointing, as bad as May was last year, to come back this year with what I think is a better team and put up the same record in May. And even with the injuries, that's just not good enough. This is around the time that the Cubs got hot last year. So hopefully they can do it again this year. But they just have to do it. I mean, this is becoming a team that is just kind of floating around, no particular, I like to point to the emotions. Like, it just seems like kind of a flat team. They win a couple, lose a couple. They did have the one bad stretch where they lost 5 in a row. That's the only time this season where they've lost as many as 3 in a row. We'll see what happens today. Hopefully today they can stop that and avoid another. I guess they lost 3 in a row. They lost 5 in a row, and then they lost 4 in a row. They've got to get themselves back on the winning track. I mean, that's just all there is to it. And because I don't know what this team's going to look like if they don't. I mean, they've got more young players they can go to. But you're kind of right in the middle of the Ian Happ and Seiya Suzuki contracts. You're in the early stages of the Dansby Swanson contract. You've got a couple years of Jameson Taillon left. I think he'll be fine, especially with Steele and Imanaga emerging and the way Ben Brown and Jordan Wicks have looked. Jameson Taillon doesn't have to be your ace. He's not paid to be your ace. He's paid to be a mid-rotation guy. And I think that's what he can be. And you might only need him to be the back-end rotation guy. And there's good pitching depth. One of my earlier episodes was about the trust that Jed Hoyer clearly showed in his organizational pitching depth. You know, the Cubs didn't go chase Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery. And I think they didn't because he thought he had what he needed to be successful with the rotation. And they've shown that they're a good solid 8 deep. I mean, the guys they've had, Hayden Wisniewski has had some good starts. Jordan Wicks was good, mostly good before he went on the injured list. Ben Brown has shown he can start. Yeah, they've got the ability to go even cover injuries and things like that in the rotation. So there's a lot to be optimistic there. Again, the schedule weakens up a little bit here, and they just have to play better. Hopefully I have some interview guests coming up in the next few weeks. You know, had a bit of a gap here with producing. I'm going to get back on that and be better and be more reliable, but you know, hopefully the Cubs will give us some excitement here soon. Finish the series with the Reds. Beat Tampa, come home and do some damage against the Cardinals. That's always a good thing. But as we say, go Cubs. Thank you for joining me today. If you like this episode, please drop a rating and a review wherever it is you get your podcasts and share an episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter, X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. And check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the Cubs PS Plus podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!